Hi guys, today we're going to talk about converting the slope-intercept form of an equation to standard form. And the I can statement we're working on is I can work freely with multiple forms of linear equations to find the slope and y-intercept of a line. Because once we have the slope and the y-intercept, graphing it is going to be very easy. So let's review what we know about the slope-intercept formula. We know that it's y equals mx plus b, where m is the slope and b is our y-intercept. So let's think of this statement. This formula will be used to blank and blank linear equations. Think, what might you put in the blanks of this sentence? If you've said we use this formula to write linear equations and to graph linear equations, you'd be correct. So to be able to use this formula, though, the equation you're graphing must be in this format, y equals mx plus b. What this means is I can make some changes to the side that has the x on it, but the y is always by itself. If you've noticed in our graphing packet, we didn't touch the y at all, other than to find out what y was when we plugged in an x value. So this means we're going to need to solve for y. And that's going to be the basis of the work we do today, solving for y. Well, let's talk about standard form. It's another form of a linear equation, but it looks a little different from slope-intercept form. Standard form always looks like ax plus by equals c, where x and y are still going to represent coordinates of an ordered pair. You may have noticed in this form that x and y are on the same side of the equation. This has to be true for a linear equation to be written in standard form. A can't be negative. There are a few cases where it will maybe possibly end up being negative, but if we're really working with standard form in its truest format, A will not be negative. And there can't be any fractions. So A, B, and C are all going to represent whole numbers or integers, with the exception of A being a positive number. So let's go back to slope-intercept form, y equals mx plus b. If x and y have to be on opposite sides of the equation, this means we're going to have to solve for y. So let's talk about the steps we will use in order to solve for y. Thinking back to ax plus by equals c, our standard form of an equation. Well, the first thing we're going to have to do is, just like solving any two-step equation, I'm going to undo the adding or subtracting of the term that's on the same side with the y. So that means I'm going to add or subtract, or in this case it's always going to be to subtract that ax term, or the term that has the x, because I want y to be by itself on the left side of the equation. Next, I'm going to divide by the number in front of y, or the coefficient of y. And this is where it's going to get a little tricky, because I'm going to have, when I subtract ax, that x term, I may end up with two terms, and very often we'll end up with two different, unlike terms on the right side of the equation. So when I divide that number by y, I'm actually going to divide it using the distributive property. Or when I divide by the coefficient, I'm going to do that using the distributive property. And we're going to talk about that. So let's look at an example. 2x minus 3y equals 6 is in standard form, but we need to write it in slope-intercept form. And we're going to do that so that we can find the slope and the y-intercept of this line. So step one, I need to subtract the x term, because my goal is to isolate that y and get it on one side by itself. So if I subtract it from one side, I also have to subtract it from the other side, though. So now what I have on the left side is that 2x is eliminated. I'm left with negative 3y, and that equals, well, I have that negative 2x that I've moved over, and I still have minus 6. Now, you might be thinking, what if I put negative 6 minus 2x? That's fine. You're just going to have to recognize, though, that the slope is always the coefficient of x. And we'll talk about that in a second, too. Then, to get the y by itself, I need to divide by negative 3. Well, if I do it on one side, I have to do it on the other. So what does that look like? Well, I'm going to think of it as using the distributive property. I need to divide every term, since negative 2x and negative 6 can't be combined. They're not like terms. I need to divide both of those terms by negative 3. So I'm going to divide negative 2x by negative 3, and I'm also going to divide negative 6 by negative 3. And when I do that, I'm going to get y on the left side of my equation equals, well, negative 2 divided by negative 3 is going to be negative to negative is positive, and I'm going to just write it and leave it as a fraction in simplest form, okay? When we are writing in slope-intercept form, we're not going to use decimals. We're always going to write the slope in fraction form. This is because it's easier for me to find the rise over the run. And when I take negative 6 and divide it by negative 3, I'm actually going to get negative divided by negative is positive 2. So there's my equation in slope-intercept form. Y equals 2/3 x plus 2. So now that I'm looking at this equation, I can find the slope is 2/3. So that means that to go from one point on the line to the other, I'm going to rise 2 places on the vertically, and then horizontally go to the right 3 places. My line is going to cross the y-intercept at positive 2, so 2 is my y-intercept. Now it's your turn. Give it a shot. Try this problem. When you're done, hit play. Okay, let's see how you did. To solve for y, I need to get y by itself, which means I'm going to first get rid of that x term. To get rid of negative 6x, I'm going to have to add 6x to both sides. This eliminates the x term on the left side, leaving me with 9y equals 6x minus 3. I can't combine those because they're not like terms. But y still needs to be by itself. It has to have a coefficient of 1. So that means I'm going to divide the left side by y, and using the distributive property, divide every term on the right side by 9 as well. This will leave me with y on the left side, and when I simplify 6/9, I get 2/3 x minus 1/3. Because when I simplify minus 3/9, I get negative 1/3, or minus 1/3. Now I can find that the slope is 2/3 and the y-intercept is negative 1/3. Now it's your turn. Go back, or convert each of the following equations into slope-intercept form. Then identify the slope and y-intercept. You can go back and watch any portion of this video as many times as you need to, or the entire video. But don't forget to WSQ in your notes.